It started on one of those evenings that looked too calm to be real. Late summer, sky half orange, half grey. The kind of quiet that makes the air feel like it's waiting for something bad to happen. The roads shimmered faintly with leftover heat, and the faint hum of tires and cicadas filled the gaps between thoughts. Officer Grant Tiller had been on the highway for almost 12 hours straight. His shift was supposed to end an hour ago, but he'd taken one more call out of habit, a routine check, suspicious vehicle near the exit ramp that led to one of those private gated communities outside town. He was tired, but the kind of tired that makes a man sharp in strange ways. His eyes caught every flicker in the mirrors, every movement in the rearview lights. He knew the roads better than his own house. Out here, asphalt and instinct were the only things that made sense anymore. Grant had been a highway patrol officer for 9 years, the kind of man who didn't talk much but noticed everything. He wasn't the type who played power games with drivers. He treated people fair, even the ones who deserved more than a ticket. He'd seen his share of wrecks, literal and moral. The long nights and the endless paperwork didn't bother him. What did was how people treated rules like they were optional if they lived behind gates or paid the right people. The community near the ramp, Lakewood Estates, was one of those places. The kind with neat lawns, white stone mailboxes, and men who wore golf polos even when it rained. Grant didn't patrol there often. Technically, it wasn't his jurisdiction, but the roads leading in and out, those were his. He always noticed how people from that area acted like they were above the law, like the HOA there was some kind of mini-government that replaced everything else. That night, the air had that heavy stillness that only comes before something stupid happened. Grant pulled his cruiser to the shoulder and sipped cold coffee from a paper cup that had the bitter taste of burnt grounds and exhaustion. His dash camera blinked red, recording the empty stretch ahead. Then he saw it. 2 bright headlights speeding down from the gated road and cutting straight onto the state highway without signaling. A grey SUV, the kind that screamed money but drove like the driver had none of the patience that money was supposed to teach. He flicked on his lights just to be safe, a quick flash that usually calmed people down. But instead of slowing, the SUV sped up, then swerved right and pulled over halfway onto the gravel as if daring him to make a scene. Grant sighed and stepped out, straightening his belt. His boots crunched the dry gravel as he approached. Through the tinted window he could see a man inside, phone up, recording already. Grant had seen this type before. Someone who thought a camera was armor. The window rolled down halfway and the driver's voice came out sharp and confident. "Officer, you're out of your jurisdiction. This is Lakewood property." Grant blinked, confused for a second. "Sir, you're on a state highway," he said, his tone calm but firm. "Mind showing your license and registration?" The man smirked, waving some kind of laminated ID toward him. "We're the HOA enforcement team. You can't stop me. We're conducting a neighborhood patrol tonight." Grant looked at the card. It had an eagle logo, gold lettering, and the words Lakewood Estates Compliance Division. It looked official, but in the way fake badges from a printer shop look official under dim light. He wanted to laugh, but something about the man's stare stopped him. It wasn't the usual entitled look. It was colder, like the man believed what he was saying, like he really thought he had authority here. Grant tried to keep it light. "Sir, HOA patrols don't have jurisdiction on public roads. Please hand over your license." But the driver didn't move. "You can't talk to me like that. We have every right to pull people over near our community. There have been break-ins. The HOA permitted us to stop suspicious vehicles." Grant's pulse ticked up, not from fear, but disbelief. He looked past the man to see another vehicle pull up behind them, a white SUV, also with flashing amber lights on the dashboard. 2 more men inside. Same logo on the side doors. Lakewood Security Unit. For a moment, Grant just stood there, trying to process it. The quiet road, the 3 cars, the men watching him like he was the one in the wrong. The air felt thicker. Something was off. He'd handled people pretending to be cops before, but this wasn't that simple. These guys weren't pretending to be him. They thought they were something bigger. The man in the SUV leaned closer, his voice dropping lower, more personal. "You do. Don't need to be out here anymore, officer. We've got this handled. You can go back to your highway." There was something about the way he said your highway that rubbed Grant the wrong way, like a warning dressed as advice. He didn't respond. He just stared at the man long enough for the silence to become uncomfortable. Then, as if realizing the tension, the man smiled faintly. "We're all on the same side, right? Keeping things safe?" Grant nodded slowly. "That's right," he said. "Except one of us still wears a real badge." The man's smile faded. Grant walked back to his cruiser, the sound of his boots dragging over gravel louder now. He didn't look back, but he could feel their eyes on him. Every instinct told him not to turn his back, but he didn't want to escalate. He got in, shut the door, and sat there for a few seconds, staring at the reflection of their fake lights flashing in his mirror. He thought about calling it in, but what would he even say? HOA cops tried to pull rank on me. It sounded ridiculous. He decided to log it later, after he got home, but something about it didn't leave his mind. That night, when he finally pulled into his driveway, the neighborhood felt different. Quieter, heavier. He lived only a few miles from Lakewood Estates, same county, same zip code. But there was a line between people like him and people like them. A line that money had drawn years ago, and tonight it had shifted just a little closer to his side. He didn't know it then, but that strange encounter on the side of the road was just the start. Something had been building in that gated community for months. Something about power, control, and the idea that rules only applied to everyone else. Grant had no idea that the next time he'd see those HOA patrol cars, there'd be blood on the asphalt. The next few days after that strange roadside encounter hung in Grant's mind like a shadow that refused to leave. It wasn't just about the fake badge or the arrogance of that man. It was the look in his eyes, the confidence of someone who believed he was untouchable. Grant kept thinking about it while doing his usual highway runs, catching speeders and helping stranded cars. But every time he passed that Lakewood exit, he caught himself glancing toward the gate. Something about that place didn't sit right. By the end of the week, he'd started hearing small talk on the police radio, quiet chatter from nearby deputies, complaints from delivery drivers who said they'd been stopped or questioned by community enforcers. One driver said a man in a black SUV had blocked his truck until he showed proof of residence for the package drop. Another said he was fined on the spot for reckless driving inside HOA limits. That last part hit Grant hard. HOAs didn't have the authority to fine anyone for traffic violations. These weren't just overzealous homeowners. They were building their own little system, one that ignored the real law. Grant decided to dig a little. Off duty, he drove by Lakewood on a Saturday morning, just to see. The place was spotless. Kids riding bikes, couples walking small dogs, sprinklers flicking arcs across lawns that all looked the same shade of green. Nothing about it looked wrong. But then, near the guard post by the entrance, he saw the grey SUV from before. The same eagle emblem on the side. 2 men inside, what-eat, ching every car that came through. One of them noticed Grant's personal car and gave him a long, cold stare as he passed. That was enough. He parked down the street, out of sight, and took a few photos. The vehicles had license plates registered to a private security firm, but when he ran the name through the system later that night, nothing came up. It wasn't a real company. By Monday, things started to shift from strange to hostile. A call came in about a noise complaint near Lakewood, someone outside the gates blasting music from their truck. Grant took it. The scene was simple enough. A young man, early 20s, parked near the curb with his windows down. He wasn't breaking any laws. But before Grant could even talk to him, a white SUV pulled up behind them, the same logo on its side, and 2 men in dark vests stepped out. "Officer, we'll handle this," one of them said. Grant's jaw clenched. No, you won't. The man gave him that same confident smile, the kind that said, You don't understand who runs this place. They didn't back down. For a few seconds it felt like a standoff. Homeowners peeked through blinds. One of the men even rested his hand near his belt, where a gun holster was clipped. Not a toy one this time, a real one. Grant forced himself to stay calm. He took the young man's ID, ran it, gave him a warning, and told him to head home. As the truck pulled away, the two HOA officers lingered. One of them leaned in close as Grant walked back to his cruiser and muttered, This isn't your area anymore. Grant turned slowly. Say that again. But the man didn't. He just got back in his SUV and drove off. Something inside Grant snapped after that. It wasn't just about being challenged. It was about principle. The law wasn't something you just rewrote because you had money and a gate. He started asking questions at the station, trying to figure out who these guys were. But most of his co-workers brushed it off. Lakewood? They've been like that for years. Let them play sheriff on their own streets. But they weren't just playing anymore. That week, a local contractor reported missing tools and damage to his truck after arguing with the HOA over a parking permit. Another man, a landscaper, said he was banned from the neighborhood after refusing to pay a compliance fee. And then came the story that really got Grant's attention. A woman, late 30s, who said the HOA patrol followed her car out of the neighborhood all the way to the main road. When she stopped, they flashed their lights and told her she'd violated curfew. Grant knew then it wasn't just power tripping, it was control. He went back to the community in plain clothes one night, sitting in his car across from the entrance, just watching. The fake patrol cars circled every 10 minutes, headlights sweeping across perfect lawns. He noticed how people moved differently when those cars passed. Lawn chairs folded quickly, kids went inside. No one waved. No one smiled. The place looked peaceful, but it wasn't peaceful. It was fear. The next day, Grant confronted one of his supervisors, Captain Marlowe, about it. The older man rubbed his temples, tired. Grant, listen. I know it's weird, but those people have money and influence. The county gets donations from its board every year. You don't want to start something political. Grant stared at him. You mean I shouldn't do my job because they write checks? Marlowe didn't answer. He just sighed. Drop it. Grant couldn't. It wasn't in his nature. He started digging into property records, looking for the names behind the HOA board. The one that stood out was Edward Langford, former developer, mid-50s, known for community improvement projects and a history of legal grey areas. A man who'd been sued multiple times, but never convicted. The same man, Grant realized, who'd been in that SUV that night. Langford wasn't just the HOA president. He was the founder of the so-called Lakewood Compliance Division. He'd built it out of nothing, hired private contractors with military backgrounds, and given them the authority no one else had questioned. They patrolled like police, but without oversight. The deeper Grant looked, the darker it got. One of the guards, a man named Cliff Weller, had a record: assault, harassment, dismissed charges. Another was an ex-law enforcement officer, fired for misconduct. And still, they roamed that neighborhood unchecked. Grant started documenting everything. Videos, license plates, statements from locals. He even tried to contact a few residents. Most refused to talk. One woman, voice shaking, told him, "They fined my husband $2,000 for having a friend over after 10. He tried to fight it, and the next morning our mailbox was smashed and the tires on his truck were slashed. Just leave it alone." He couldn't. He knew it was getting dangerous when his own car started being followed. First once, then again, always the same white SUV a few cars back. At first he brushed it off as a coincidence, but the pattern repeated. Same roads, same time of day. His girlfriend Anna noticed how jumpy he'd become. "You're scaring me," she said one night as he checked the locks on the door for the third time. "I'm fine," he muttered. But he wasn't. He could feel the pressure closing in, like he'd kicked something powerful awake. One night around midnight, his phone buzzed with an anonymous message. A single photo. His cruiser, parked outside his house. The picture had been taken from across the street. Beneath it, a message. "You're not one of us. Stay off our roads." He didn't sleep that night. From then on, every call he took near Lakewood carried weight. Every traffic stop felt like someone was watching. Sometimes when he passed the gate, the guard inside would smile a little too long or lift a phone as if taking a photo. He tried reporting the threats, but the department wanted proof. Without names or confrontation, they couldn't do anything. And that was exactly how the HOA wanted it. Weeks passed, and Grant's patience wore thin. He started catching small details. Rumors about HOA meetings held late at night, security footage erased after certain patrol shifts, even a missing persons report tied loosely to a man who'd once delivered for a local service company. It wasn't enough to prove anything, but enough to know something rotten was festering under that perfect suburban surface. Grant's frustration turned into an obsession. He started going out there even when he wasn't on duty, watching from a distance, recording patterns. He could feel himself changing, shorter temper, restless sleep, the constant itch to confront them again. His friends noticed it too. "You're losing yourself over this," one of them said. But deep down, Grant knew it wasn't just about the HOA anymore. It was about what they represented, people who thought they could rewrite reality and get away with it. He couldn't shake the thought that someone was going to get hurt if this kept going. And he was right. The tension between him and Langford finally reached a point of no return. One humid night when Grant found a crashed vehicle on the shoulder near Lakewood. It was one of the HOA patrol cars, flipped on its side. No police report, no ambulance. Nothing. Just shattered glass and silence. But when he looked closer, he saw something that made his blood run cold. The decals on the SUV had been scratched off. The gold eagle emblem ripped clean. And on the cracked windshield, someone had written in thick black marker, "Not above the law." Grant didn't know it yet, but that message was only the beginning. It was the spark that would drag him and the entire Lakewood community into something far darker than anyone imagined. The night of the crime began like any other humid summer evening, heavy with the kind of stillness that warns you something's about to snap. The air over Lakewood Estates felt charged, too quiet, too expectant. Even the usual hum of sprinklers seemed muted. Grant had been running on adrenaline and caffeine for days, caught in the web of his own obsession. Every part of him screamed to walk away, to let it go. But his gut told him something big was about to happen. And that night, it did. Just after 11 p.m., dispatch picked up a strange call. A woman's voice, trembling, said there was yelling near the Lakewood clubhouse. Men shouting, engines revving. She hung up before giving her name. Grant was off duty, sitting in his living room, staring at the blinds half closed, when the alert came through. He didn't even think. He grabbed his keys, his badge, his sidearm, and drove into the thick darkness toward that neighborhood that had already taken too much of his peace. As he neared the gates, he saw them open, not for him, but for two of those same white SUVs with the Golden Eagle decals. Their amber lights were flashing in rhythm, glowing like a warning. Grant stayed back, following with his headlights off. When the gates closed behind them, he parked on the side of the road and slipped through the small pedestrian gap, quietly as he could. The whole place looked wrong. Streetlights flickered. The air smelled faintly of gasoline. He crept up the main road toward the clubhouse. That's when he heard it. The sound of a man shouting, sharp and furious, echoing off the empty houses. Then another voice, lower, calmer, but cruel. Grant knew that tone, before he even saw the face. Langford. He crouched behind a hedge, the grass wet against his knees. In front of the clubhouse stood 3 SUVs in a tight triangle, lights flashing. 4 men in tactical vests were arguing with someone. Other man, unarmed, hands raised. Grant recognized him faintly. It was a delivery driver who'd filed one of the first complaints weeks ago. The man's shirt was torn, his face bruised. "You can't do this!" the man shouted. "I didn't touch anything, I was just—" Langford stepped forward, his voice calm in a way that chilled the blood. "You were trespassing. You've been warned." Grant's stomach dropped. He saw something in Langford's hand, a pistol, small and black, tucked casually at his side like it was part of his uniform. Grant stood up, pulled his badge from his belt, and stepped into the light. "Put the weapon down." For a split second, everything froze. Langford turned slowly, his expression unreadable. Then he smiled. "Officer Tiller," he said softly. "You're off duty. This doesn't concern you." "It does when you're pointing a gun at a man," Grant said, his voice steady but his heart hammering. "Step back." The other guards shifted, tense, hands near their belts. Grant's eyes darted between them. He could feel how close this was to spiraling out of control. Langford tilted his head, his tone almost mocking. "You shouldn't be here. You've been warned more than once." "Warned?" Grant took a step closer. "You've been terrorizing people. You think that's the law? You think that's an order?" Langford's calm broke for just a moment, his jaw tightening. "Order is what keeps people like you from tearing this place apart." Grant didn't see who moved first, but suddenly one of the guards raised his weapon. A flash of light. A gunshot cracked through the air, loud enough to rattle windows. Grant dove to the side, hitting the ground hard. The delivery man screamed. Chaos exploded. Grant rolled behind a pillar, drawing his gun. "Drop your weapons!" he yelled, but his voice was swallowed by shouting and the echo of more gunfire. Sparks flew off a nearby metal sign. Someone ran. Someone fell. When Grant peeked out again, the delivery man was on the ground, blood darkening his shirt. Langford stood over him, breathing hard, face pale in the pulsing amber light. For the first time, Grant saw fear on him. Not fear of what he'd done, but fear of being caught. Grant stepped out, gun trained on Langford. "Drop it, Edward!" Langford looked at him, eyes wide now. "You don't understand. He attacked me." His voice cracked, but Grant could see the lie shaking in his throat. "You shot an unarmed man," Grant said, moving closer. His heart felt like it was beating in his ears. "It's over." Langford's hand trembled as he pointed the gun toward Grant. "You're not taking me down for this. You're not ruining everything I built. Edward, don't." But he did. Another flash, another deafening bang. Grant fired back on instinct. The recoil jolted up his arm and his vision blurred for a second. When it cleared, Langford was on the ground, staring at nothing, his gun inches from his hand. The silence that followed was unbearable. The guards froze, eyes wide, weapons lowering one by one. The smell of gunpowder and burning rubber filled the air. Somewhere in the distance, a sprinkler sputtered to life, spraying water over the dark stains on the pavement. Grant's breath came in ragged gasps. He stepped closer, gun still raised, but there was no need. Langford's chest wasn't moving. The man who had treated the law like a toy was lying dead in the middle of the street he thought he owned. For a few seconds, all Grant could do was stand there, trembling, his mind refusing to believe what had just happened. Then reality crashed in. Sirens, flashing blue and red from down the road. Someone must have called it in. The other guards started shouting, panicking, their perfect control finally cracking. One of them tried to lift Langford's body, yelling that it was an accident, that Grant had murdered him. Another ran for the clubhouse, disappearing inside. Grant dropped his weapon and raised his hands as the county patrol cars screeched to a stop. Officers poured out, guns drawn, yelling for everyone to get on the ground. He didn't resist. He just sank to his knees, feeling the weight of everything hit him at once. The noise, the blood, the smell of gasoline, the realization that there was no going back. In the chaos, he caught one last look at Langford's face, pale under the flashing lights. For all his arrogance, all his power, he looked small now. Human, the king of Lakewood Estates, brought down by the law he thought he could control. As they cuffed Grant's hands and pulled him to his feet, he tried to explain what had happened, but his voice barely worked. Every word felt heavy. The other guards shouted conflicting stories. Some said Langford fired first, others said Grant did. It didn't matter. It was all noise. The paramedics rushed in, covering the body, loading the wounded delivery man onto a stretcher. The residents of Lakewood, drawn by the gunfire, gathered at their windows and porches, their perfect world cracked open in front of them. The HOA empire had fallen apart in a single night of fear and pride. Grant felt something cold settle in his chest as he was led toward the patrol car. He'd come here to stop a power-hungry man from hurting anyone else, and now there were 2 lives gone because of it. The flashing lights painted the houses red and blue, like the whole neighborhood was bleeding. He didn't struggle when they put him in the back seat. He just stared out at the scene, his reflection faint in the glass, the distant echo of shouting fading behind him. For the first time, the roads he loved felt foreign. The law, the thing he'd sworn to uphold, suddenly felt blurred and fragile. And as the patrol car pulled away, leaving Lakewood behind, Grant realized the awful truth. Justice and control weren't opposites. They were the same thing, twisted differently by whoever held the gun. The shooting at Lakewood Estates became the story everyone was talking about within hours. News vans lined the county roads by sunrise, their antennas poking into the grey dawn sky like metal weeds. Headlines hit faster than anyone could breathe. Highway patrol officer kills HOA. A president in gated community standoff. Reporters didn't care about context. They cared about shock. By the time Grant was moved from the county holding to interrogation, the world outside had already picked a side. Some called him a hero. Others called him a murderer. Inside the sterile white room, everything felt too bright. The table between Grant and the detectives might as well have been a wall. He'd told the story over and over. How he heard the gunshots, how Langford raised his weapon first, how he had no choice. But each time he said it, the words felt less real, like pieces of someone else's nightmare. His lawyer told him to stay quiet now. The investigation has to play out, she said softly, but her eyes told him she wasn't sure which way it would go. Meanwhile, Lakewood Estates went silent. The once bustling neighborhood that boasted security and order now looked like a ghost town. News crews caught footage of residents carrying boxes, moving out under the cover of early morning fog. The HOA board dissolved within a week. Their meeting minutes were seized, their private security program shut down. But the damage went deeper than paperwork. Edward Langford's death fractured the community he built. To some, he'd been a savior, a man who protected their property values and kept the neighborhood safe. To others, he was finally exposed for what he truly was, a bully with money and a badge he gave himself. At his funeral, only a handful of people showed up. A few board members stood by the casket looking uneasy. Langford's widow, Margaret, kept her eyes forward the entire time, her face pale and unreadable. The cameras outside caught her brief statement. "My husband only ever wanted to protect his home." It was the kind of line that played well on the evening news, but behind closed doors, those who knew her said she hadn't slept since that night. For Grant, the days blurred. He was suspended without pay, pending review. His badge and weapon were taken, leaving behind a hollow imprint on his belt. His small house felt colder, emptier. He stopped answering calls from friends at the department. Most didn't know what to say anyway. Anna tried to stay. She brought him coffee, tried to talk, tried to make him eat, but the distance between them grew with each unanswered question. "You did what you had to," she said one night, sitting across from him at the kitchen table. "He was going to kill you." Grant didn't respond. He just stared at the window where his reflection sat beside hers. "I keep thinking," he murmured. "What if I'd waited a second longer? What if I'd said something different?" She reached across the table, took his hand, but he pulled it away gently. "You can't keep doing this to yourself," she said, voice breaking. "You didn't pull the trigger out of hate." He looked at her, his eyes tired. "No," he said quietly, "but I pulled it just the same." The department's internal review dragged on for weeks. Every angle was analyzed, every frame from his body cam studied. When the footage was finally released, it confirmed most of his story. Langford had fired first. The public opinion shifted overnight. News anchors changed their tone. "Officer Tiller acted in self-defense," they said now, as if they'd always believed it. But Grant didn't feel cleared. The truth didn't bring peace. It just left silence. The delivery driver, Marcus Vega, survived but with lasting damage. A bullet had grazed his shoulder. He refused interviews, but word spread that he planned to sue the HOA's estate for unlawful detention and emotional trauma. It wasn't about money, people said. It was about principle. The county used the case as a wake-up call. Within months, private community enforcement programs were banned. Real police oversight was reintroduced to all gated areas in the region. But to the residents of Lakewood, it was too late. The perfect bubble they'd built was cracked beyond repair. The manicured lawns and uniform mailboxes couldn't hide the stain of what had happened there. For Grant, the aftermath was quieter, more personal. He spent long nights sitting on his porch, staring at the empty road. The hum of passing cars used to calm him, but now it just reminded him of the sound that came before the gunfire, the stillness, the waiting. He'd always believed that doing the right thing would feel clear, solid. But it didn't. It felt like standing on thin ice, hearing the cracks spread beneath your feet. Sometimes he'd drive out past the old Lakewood gate. The sign was gone now, the emblem of the eagle painted over with grey. The roads inside were empty, except for a few for sale signs and stray papers blown into corners. It looked like a town abandoned after a disaster no one wanted to talk about. He'd park there for a while, hands on the steering wheel, replaying everything. The confrontation, the gunshot, Langford's face in that last second before it was all over. He wondered if Langford had felt any regret. He wondered if power had ever made him happy. Back in town, the people moved on. The headlines faded. New scandals took their place. But the name Lakewood Estates stayed in the background, whispered like a cautionary tale. Parents told their kids it was what happens when people forget what the law is really for. One afternoon, months later, Grant got a call from his old captain, Marlowe. The voice on the other end was softer than he remembered. "They're reinstating you," Marlowe said. "Cleared your record. Said you acted in the line of duty." Grant didn't answer right away. He looked at his empty badge case on the table, untouched since the night it was taken. "You should come back," Marlowe added. "You're good at the job." Grant finally said, "I don't know if I'm that person anymore." There was a pause. "You're still a cop, Grant," Marlowe said. "You just forgot what that means." After the call ended, Grant sat for a long time thinking about what that meant. Being a cop wasn't about control. It was about balance. It was about standing between order and chaos, no matter how blurry the line got. But that line had cost him something he couldn't name. As dusk fell, he stepped outside again. The air was cool, still carrying the faint smell of summer rain. Somewhere far away, a siren wailed, then faded into the distance. He closed his eyes, listening. He knew he'd never forget that night, The gunfire, the flashing lights, the sound of his own heartbeat drowning everything else out. But maybe forgetting wasn't the point. Maybe living with it, learning from it, was the only kind of justice left. And as he stood there in the fading light, he finally understood something about power, about law, about men like Langford and himself. They weren't so different. They both wanted to keep things safe. But one of them thought safety came from control. The other had learned, painfully, that it came from letting go. Months passed, and the world moved on, as it always does. But the shadows of Lakewood Estates lingered like a faint scar on the town's conscience. The police investigation concluded, the lawsuits were filed, and the neighborhood gates, once symbols of exclusivity and order, were finally torn down by the city. What remained was an empty stretch of land dotted with abandoned houses and half-finished renovations, a silent monument to what happens when control turns into obsession. Grant Tiller, reinstated after a long and public review, declined to return to active duty. His badge was returned to him in a plain envelope, slid across a desk by Captain Marlowe, with an understanding nod. "It's yours if you ever want it," Marlowe had said. Grant didn't. He thanked the captain, tucked the envelope into his coat pocket, and walked out of the precinct for the last time. The sun was rising, and for the first time in months, it didn't feel like judgment. It felt like release. He sold his small house near the interstate and moved out to a quiet part of the county where the only sounds at night were crickets and the wind through the pines. He took up part-time work teaching firearm safety at a local community center. A bitter irony, some said, but for Grant, it was a kind of penance. He didn't teach people to shoot. He taught them to think before they did. A gun isn't about power, he told his students. It's about responsibility, and you don't ever want to learn that lesson the hard way. Anna visited a few times after he moved. Their conversations grew shorter, more formal, until one evening she didn't come back. There was no argument, no goodbye, just the quiet understanding that what had broken between them couldn't be rebuilt. She later transferred to a city department, and rumor had it that she started a family. Grant never checked. He wanted her to have peace, something neither of them could find together after that night. The legal aftermath played out like a grim echo of the event itself, slow, deliberate, and painful. The Langford estate faced multiple civil suits from residents and former employees. Investigations uncovered years of corruption, misuse of HOA funds, unauthorized surveillance of residents, and ties to local officials who had looked the other way. The illusion of order that Lakewood had prided itself on turned out to be built on fear and silence. Margaret Langford, the widow, inherited the chaos. She sold off what was left, disappeared from public life, and was last seen leaving the state. A local newspaper ran a retrospective a year later, The Rise and Fall of Lakewood Estates. It included a photo of Edward Langford standing proudly at the front gates during the neighborhood's opening ceremony, a hand on his chest, smiling for the camera. The caption beneath it read simply, "Power, once given, rarely relinquished." Marcus Vega, the delivery driver, won his lawsuit. The court awarded him damages for unlawful detention and psychological trauma. But in interviews afterward, he didn't talk about the money. He talked about fear, the kind that seeps into ordinary moments. "It wasn't just what they did," he said. "It's how everyone else let it happen. No one asked questions because they liked feeling safe. They just didn't care what it cost." His words struck a nerve. Editorials began to appear in local papers, questioning the unchecked authority of private communities, the privatization of policing, and the fragility of morality when comfort is at stake. Lawmakers, spurred by the public outcry, passed new regulations limiting the power of homeowners associations and banning private armed patrols in residential areas. Lakewood became a case study, an example professors cited when discussing ethics, authority, and collective responsibility. But for those who had lived through it, it wasn't theory. It was a memory. Grant sometimes drove past the place on long, sleepless nights. Nature had started to reclaim the roads. Weeds cracked through the pavement, vines crawled over mailboxes. The silence there was different now, not peaceful, but heavy, like the air after a confession. He would park near where the Langford residence once stood and sit for a while, headlights dimmed. The wind moving through the empty streets carried faint echoes, children laughing, sprinklers ticking, the distant bark of a dog. Ghosts of a life that had pretended to be perfect. In time, he began writing about what happened, not as a report, not as a statement, but as a reflection. His essays appeared in small law enforcement journals, then in broader publications. He didn't name names or describe the violence in detail. Instead, he wrote about fear, about how easily authority becomes a mask for insecurity, about how good intentions, left unchecked, curdle into tyranny. His words resonated because they were not angry. They were weary, human. The line between order and control, he wrote in one essay, is drawn by empathy. When we forget to feel for others, we start enforcing laws that serve only ourselves. His writings made him something of a quiet voice of conscience in a profession that rarely looked inward. A few officers reached out to thank him, saying his perspective changed how they viewed their badge. Others dismissed him as disillusioned, soft. Grant didn't mind either way. He'd learned that moral clarity was rarely comfortable and often lonely. In the larger sense, justice was served, at least on paper. The guilty were exposed, systems were reformed, and the worst excesses of Lakewood's private regime were dismantled. But justice, Grant had come to understand, was never simple arithmetic. It didn't erase what had been done. It didn't restore trust, or bring back the man who'd fallen to his bullet, or the years of paranoia that had corroded a community. Justice was a process, not a prize. And like any process, it left scars. In the years that followed, Lakewood's story faded from public memory. The land was eventually sold to developers who promised to revitalize the area with affordable housing. They broke ground one spring morning under bright skies as construction crews tore up what remained of the old security gate. No plaque, no marker, no acknowledgement of what had happened there. Just a new foundation over the remnants of the old. Grant drove by one last time before the rebuilding began. He watched the bulldozers move, their metal arms tearing through concrete like paper. He thought about Langford, about himself, about how both men had believed they were protecting something worth preserving. The difference was that one of them never realized how far he'd gone until it was too late. As the sun set behind the construction site, Grant whispered something he hadn't said since the night of the shooting. "I'm sorry." It wasn't for Langford alone. It was for everyone who had paid the price of silence, for every time fear had masqueraded as safety. The moral weight of Lakewood Estates didn't end with the headlines or the lawsuits. It lived on in the uneasy truth it revealed, that the need for control is often born from the fear of chaos, and that fear, left unexamined, can make monsters out of ordinary people. And as Grant drove away for the last time, the fading orange light caught the empty signpost where the community's name used to be. The letters were gone, peeled away by time and weather. Only a faint outline remained, a ghost of what once was. It was perhaps the most fitting memorial